Hello guys, so today we're starting a new series for building a basic app and its API. We will start with the API, but we'll also build a simple web interface. This is not a tutorial for absolute beginners because you'll need to not master, but you'll need to know a few basic concepts. Some of them are Ajax, JSON, PHP, JavaScript, HTML, CSS. So if you've played with these things a bit, you'll understand what I'm doing here. But if you've never heard of them and you want to know how to create an app, this is not a tutorial for you. Okay, so let's get into more technical stuff. So almost every API, almost every app needs to communicate with a server. So we have the app and the server, and we will be using JSON, that's in the middle, to communicate with the server. We'll be using Ajax based on JSON. Ajax is a way of communicating asynchronously, but you don't need to know all of these terms. Anyways, why I'm telling you all of this? Maybe you can create a simple web app. I mean, something like a database or something like that, without going the API route. You can simply have some PHP logic that grabs the data from the database and creates a simple interface. But this route that I'm going through gives you the option to create a mobile or front-end app without creating any extra logic. If you already have an app, let's say. So let's say you have the API, you have some PHP code that displays an interface, and now you want to also create an app because the business is booming or stuff like that. Let's say you're making money and you also want to create an app. Now the normal route would be to create an API, and from there you will need to create your mobile app. Let's show you two schemes to better understand what I mean. So here is a more simpler scheme that explains what I had in mind when I choose this route, the more complicated route for showing you how to create an app. So here we have a simple code, PHP code, that connects to the database and also to the user. So a user requests to see a page, the page grabs the data from the database and renders an interface. Simple as that. Now the route that I choose is more complicated. So a user requests the information to your web app that also requests the information from the PHP logic that connects to the database. So we have an extra element in here, but this gives us much more flexibility, meaning that if you, for example, have a web interface created in any code, any language, let's say PHP, JavaScript, Ruby, or what you want, you can then, if you, let's say, want to change the logic of the database or even the architecture. So let's say you had PHP plus MySQL and now you want to change to Node.js and something like MongoDB. No problem, there's no problem, because they are separated. Also, if you want to, let's say you have a web app and later you want to also create a mobile app, a native mobile app, you already have the API that communicates with your database, so there's no need to create that. The logic and the web interface are separated, so you only need to create another front end, let's say, that uses the API that you already created. I know it's a bit more complicated, but is the route to go based on an API, because it will save you a lot of time later, especially if you plan to have a big project. And if you learn how to design projects like this from scratch, it will save you a lot of time in the future when things get more complicated and so on. Okay, so what else? Okay, so I talked about PHP, and let me explain why I will be using PHP. It's basically still very popular, and even though you might have heard that it's dying or something like that, it's not true at all. WordPress, which is the most popular CMS in the world, content management system, it's based on PHP. You cannot beat that. Facebook was written in PHP and so on. So it's still it's not like it's dying or stuff like that. We currently are at PHP 7.2. Okay, enough with PHP. So I was mentioning Ajax. What is Ajax? Ajax. Well, basically it's the way that we are communicating with the way that the client communicates with the server. And originally it was based on XML, but now we're using now JSON is much more popular, which is basically looks like a JavaScript object. Don't worry if you don't understand that, because you will see how it looks, and it's basically much more simpler than you think. Okay, the last concept that I want to get into this intro is CodeIgniter and MVC. So CodeIgniter is a PHP framework. Why are we using a framework? Well, because it helps us have the code much more organized, and it also helps us code faster. And basically MVC is the architecture, meaning model view control, and as a short introduction is a way of you're organizing your logic, let's say. So the controller is the thing that stands in the middle, connecting the model with the view. So when you request something from you request a web page, your controller gets notified first, and then it sends the request to the model that grabs the data from the database and pushes it back to the controller, and the controller sends renders the UI, the view that you want, the interface, in other terms. Okay. Those are a lot of terms, so enough with this introduction. Let's get coding.